would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker. Licensed real estate broker in the state of California and member of the National Association of Realtors. But please don't hold that against me. Welcome to it, folks. We are midweek. Today is Wednesday, September 21st, 2016. As always, the best way to reach out is to head over to the website at therebelbroker.com. You can check out today's show notes. In the show notes, I always like to include links to any articles we've discussed or any other extra info that kind of helps you in your research if you want to find out more about what we were talking about that particular day. But also, you'll be able to find a link to send a note my way with any ideas, observations, suggestions, or questions that you might have. And of course, we are still looking for folks to come and take the demographic survey. There's a red button at the top of the webpage at therebelbroker.com. Not deceptively named at all. Take the survey to support the show. Click on that, enter an email address, click the Take the Survey button again, enter the same email address in the questionnaire, and you will be entered into a drawing for a $50 gift certificate at Amazon, which we will be drawing on the 1st of October. And there's a really good chance we'll continue doing that until we reach the goal number of folks who've taken the survey to get a good sampling. And so it could be, you might just not be in the drawing for one time. You might actually be in there for several. Definitely one, and then probably again in November, and then again in December if needed. And we'll just keep going till we get the number of folks who've taken the survey that I need. So it's a great opportunity for maybe you to come up with a little extra digital cash that you can spend over at Amazon. Goodness knows I spend more than my share of my hard-earned money over at Amazon, so I will facilitate you to do the same. You can spend some of my hard-earned money over at Amazon. Okay, today, what else have we got? Oh, also my special magical new way to become a member of sort of the, I hate to call it the newsletter list, because that's not really what it's about. I guess we could call it the Insiders group. So you'd get a newsletter that comes out on some interval, but you'd also get insights into new products or new offerings that I'm going to be putting out. I'd be getting your feedback on things. So you'd actually be able to sort of participate in the growth of the show in terms of suggesting different things to do, suggesting maybe different folks I should interview, that type of stuff. So it's a little bit more of a community thing, but of course, it's totally up to you, your level of participation. If you just want to sit back and consume some of the free material or free content that I'm also going to provide to folks on that list, more power to you. The easiest way to sign up for that is to text the word Rebel Broker to 44222. That's text the word Rebel Broker to the number 44222, and then follow the prompts. It'll ask you for your email address, and then you will be all set to go. You'll be automatically added to that list, and as new content comes out, new free stuff, I'll be sending it to the folks on that list. All right, today I have kind of an interesting one. It's another one where if you're not someone like me who consumes as much news as possible on these subjects, it's easy to miss things that are obvious contradictions that really don't make a whole lot of sense. And we've got another one, and this is not new. This is a subject that we've hit before with this specific group of folks. But I just find that it's interesting that you can get tons of headlines, right? One of the big headlines out there is builder confidence. Now, I've got two sources here, but if I just go out and Google builder confidence and just limit it to the last 30 days, there's all kinds of stuff, right? Lots of folks out there are pushing this idea that, wow, builders are really excited about what's going on. Let's see, from Housing Wire, builder confidence hits new high for 2016. More serious buyers as incomes rise. And this is also linked to that goofy story we talked about yesterday, where this narrative of everyone in the country suddenly got a 5% raise is absolute bull. So I'm not real. Apparently everybody just wants to jump on that bandwagon. And I'll tell you what's interesting is as much as anyone wants to say it, let's pretend I'm full of crap. I'm perfectly willing to entertain that idea. Let's pretend I'm totally wrong, and that by telling us that the median income has gone up, that really does mean that everyone in the country got a 5% raise, despite all the analytical power that defies that conclusion. Let's pretend it's true. Where are you seeing it? Seems to me that if there was that kind of an increase, we would see other increases, right? Maybe an increase in the level of folks saving. Nope, that's not increasing. Maybe an increase in the amount folks are spending. Well, okay, yeah, we did see an increase in the amount people are spending, but we saw a commensurate income increase in the amount of debt. So these folks aren't spending that 5% increase on the new stuff. They're going into debt on the new stuff. So where's that 5% going? Are they stuffing dollar bills into mom's mattress? I don't think they are. Now, any other time when we've actually seen numbers that indicate a honest increase in a vast number of folks' household incomes, we've seen other things that increase. We've seen retail sales increase. We've seen auto sales increase. We see other things. And I'm just not seeing any of that. So given what we talked about yesterday, given the realities of what we don't see today relating to what people are spending, I think the safer bet is that, yeah, I think we all want to believe that's true, or at least there's definitely a segment that wants to sell us that idea, but we're just not seeing it in terms of truth on the ground, in terms of people actually going out there and taking that extra 5% that they're supposedly now enjoying and doing something with it, whether it's saving or spending, right? And that's really the only two things people can do with it, aside from, as I said, stuffing that stuff into a cubbyhole somewhere and saving it for a rainy day. Builder confidence in September hit a new high for 2016, according to the good folks over at Housing Wire. It's the highest since October last year, which is kind of interesting. This is the housing market index that's released by the National Association of Home Builders and Wells Fargo. It's called the HMI, so the housing market index increased 6 points to 65 in September, up from August downwardly revised 59. And here's another thing that I love that they do with these numbers. So they'll give you a number that is, so for the month of August, I can't remember what the number was. I think it was 62 or something like that. And then at the time, they'll celebrate this number and say, hey, pretty good, still up, whatever. Then just in time to release the new number, they'll downwardly revise the previous number so that the new number just looks better. Of course, I'm assuming a motivation there. So maybe I'm again wrong. Maybe it's really they're just being super honest. But I always find the timing interesting. It seems to me that if you're going to downwardly revise, shouldn't that be a little closer to when you released the first number? I mean, so are you saying you just didn't bother to look at the numbers again until just before you released the numbers for the following month? Yeah, I don't know. But we're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing a lot of downward revisions of all kinds of numbers, whether we're talking about employment or confidence numbers or anything else. Now, this data is derived from a monthly survey the National Association of Home Builders has been conducting for 30 years. The HMI categorizes builder perceptions of current single-family home sales and sales expectations for the next 6 months as good, fair, or poor. Let's see. The survey also asks builders to rate traffic of prospective buyers as high to very high, average to low, or very low. Scores for each component are then used to calculate a seasonally adjusted index, where any number over 50 indicates that more builders view conditions as good than poor. Quoting NAHB Chairman Ed Brady, who lives in Bloomington, Illinois. I don't know why that information is important, but there it is. Quote, as household incomes rise, builders in many markets across the nation are reporting they are seeing more serious buyers, a positive sign that the housing market continues to move forward. And I would disagree with that characterization. I would say simply folks have no other choice. No one else is putting their homes on the market, so the new home market is really where they have to go. He continues on with the single-family market continues to make gradual gains, and we expect this upward momentum will build throughout the remainder of the year and into 2017. So, all right. So there's another article from more mainstream stuff at CNBC. Home builder sentiment jumps in 60 to 65 in September, and again, basically some of the same data. In fact, some of this is word for word the same, which kind of goes to my point yesterday about press releases. Remember what we talked about? in terms of folks just kind of copying and pasting, quote unquote, a story. And if you go through, you'll find it, right? You'll find tons of stories that are pitching this narrative. All right, well, let's take a look. If see, this is where it starts to lose me. Let's pretend that you say you are really into cars. And when you start talking to them, you realize that they don't know the difference between a carburetor, fuel injection, turbo, none of that. Well, that's a crappy analogy. I'm going to skip that. Pretend I didn't say that. The bottom line here is you have expectations. When someone tells you something is a certain way, you expect things, right? If it's a car guy, you expect him to know the difference between all the various elements of the car. You expect him to understand, maybe even some years and models of some particularly awesome cars from the past, right? If someone tells you that they really love to run and bike and swim, maybe you expect them to be in good shape, right? It's sort of a cause and effect thing, I guess you could say. So here's an article that's interesting from Tuesday. Just amazing. Housing starts decreased. So what do we make of that? If someone tells you they're confident about something, doesn't that seem to indicate they're going to do more in that area? And that's just not what we're seeing. There's one particular chart that I'm going to share with you. I've posted it to Pinterest, and it gives housing starts since 1968. And I think I have shared a similar graph before that wasn't going back quite that far. This one is a shocker because if you look at the housing starts today versus in the late 60s and 70s, or right up until the downturn, we're nowhere near. We're below the average in terms of starts, and all of this is in the face of increased population and increased immigration growth, all these kinds of things that are going on. And then when you look at this chart, when we've gone through all of these things in our heads, we've gone through these mental gymnastics to try to explain our marketplace, and you look at a chart like this, and you get that moment of clarity where you realize, well, duh, no wonder we're paying such ridiculous prices in a much broader sense. Now, of course, my area is Looney Town. Silicon Valley is insane for a whole lot of different reasons. And obviously in the real estate world, it's nuts. To live in a place where your average priced home is $1 million plus, San Francisco, 1.2 million, San Jose, 1.1 million, I think is what the average was when I looked at it yesterday. It's insane. It's absolutely insane to think that you're spending that much money on a house. And there are other places across the country where maybe the numbers are lower or even higher in some places, but they're still nuts compared to what folks are used to, right? And if there's anything that explains it, it's this chart. There simply is not enough supply being generated. We have got such a huge problem, and you have to ask yourself, what is causing this? And we've covered this before. A ton of this has got to be put at the feet of regulations and also the fees that are levied for folks to build homes. We've already talked about that, where there are areas here in California where for every home, every single family home that a builder builds, they're charged, in addition to all the other stuff, the permitting and everything else, just for the, I don't know what you want to call it, just for the privilege of building that house, you get to pay the city or county $100,000. And remember, that's not the builder eating that cost. That suddenly turns that $400,000 house into a $500,000 house. So there is such a huge problem here in terms of facilitating builders to be able to build at a scale that satisfies the demand for homes that it's really nuts. Let me just throw some numbers out at you. So going back to January of 1972, I'm seeing, 2,500,000 total starts in terms of total number of homes built. One unit structures, just under probably about 1.4 million for single family. This is a peak. If we look at if we look at single family construction, I'm only seeing what looks like maybe 3 times since 1968 that we've had such low levels of construction of one unit of single family residential homes. One was in January of 1991, and that's right after the savings and loan scandal, if anyone remembers that. And then 1992, things went nuts. I've actually told that story about how properties I had tracked during that time suddenly went crazy in 1992. The other time is in January of probably not January, probably the end of 1981, when it looks like things were at about 600,000. But right now, today, we are only at about 700,000. And it's nuts in terms of new construction. This should be ridiculously concerning, and it should give a hint to one of the dominant reasons why we have so much trouble right now in terms of the imbalance, in terms of just not being able to find a home at a reasonable price, because the market, the balance between supply and demand is completely out of whack right now. Now, we're going to go ahead and discuss this a little bit more. We're going to take a quick break, so don't go away. We'll be right back. Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right, aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner, broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909. Welcome back, everyone. We've been talking about some interesting discrepancies between what we see in the real world versus what we're told is what folks are thinking in the building world. As I mentioned, lots of news, lots of headlines. You may have seen them. I know that NBC is pushing it. I've seen the stories on Yahoo coming across their news feed, which obviously comes from these same sources. Housing Wire, a bunch of different other places, all touting home builder sentiment and confidence levels. But at the same time, we're just not seeing the amount of permits. Or in other words, if you say you're really enthusiastic about, I keep trying to come up with analogies. You know what? I'm going to give up on the analogies, and I'll just go straight to the meat. If you say, I am really enthusiastic about the housing market, I think things are great, well, then you build, right? I'm a home builder. And if I'm confident about home building, I'm going to start doing things that involve building a home. Getting permits is a big deal. What's another big deal? Well, potentially architects are a big deal. So you got to figure if someone's going to build new properties, they're going to engage an architect, right? So I went over to the, who did I go to? These guys are the American Institute of Architects, where I started doing some research into their data. And what I found was kind of interesting. One, they're reporting their data far less frequently this year than last year. Last year, they seemed to be doing a far more frequent thing, and they were kind of revealing what the numbers were doing. And there's some interesting trends from last year, obviously, but don't inform anything today. Now, if we look at their numbers, and the most recent numbers they have appear to be from March of 2016, architecture firm billings close out first quarter on an upswing is their preferred point, I guess. But design contracts versus billings were up a little bit. But if you look at this chart, going back a year, it's down. It's not up. And in terms of just recent stuff, I guess you could say it's up. In terms of just looking at 2016, it's up from January, but it's down from September of 2015 and way down from June of 2015. So if we're going back and looking, for instance, March to March, it's down. So remember, we like year-to-year numbers because we want to figure out stuff that doesn't suffer from the seasonal problem, right? So when you do year-to-year, you get more of a realistic interpretation of what's going on. You're avoiding the seasonal differences because you might look at the numbers for January of 2016 and realize that it's a bad number. It's under 50 and say, oh, well, we're doing great. Well, January and March are different times of the year for an awful lot of folks in terms of the workflow of how a home gets built. So these are not good numbers. I am not seeing a trend here, at least. Obviously, I don't have any more recent numbers, and we're quite a ways further on into the year. But all of these trends are relatively flat or declining. Inquiries were declining. Design contracts are flat, in fact, down over the year. And actual billings is also down over the year. If you look at the regions, there are some regions are obviously doing better than others. Interestingly enough, the West is actually doing the second worst as of March. The Midwest was the worst. The Northeast was doing the best, and the South was, the second best, and the South was doing the best, which is kind of interesting. I'll link this if you like, so that folks can see this on Pinterest. But I'm not seeing it there either. So where do you go with this? I think you conclude that maybe the truth is a little bit more involved than simply saying confidence is up. Because if your confidence is up, you take certain actions based on that, and we're just not seeing it. All right. Now, next, I wanted to talk a little bit about condominiums. I came across an interesting article. This one's a little bit local, but I think it reveals a lot of the potential downsides relating to condominium ownership. I guess I'm a little bit anal retentive in that I like situations where I can control as much as possible. And when you're in a condominium situation, you're really surrendering an awful lot of that control to other people. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It can work very well. I own a condominium, and that works fine. Of course, there is always that person in the condo or in the homeowners association who sees their membership on the board as the greatest source of authority in their life, and they love to exert that whenever possible, which can be annoying. So there's definitely an element of getting along with the other folks involved in the process of managing the property. But there's also every other human being in it, right? And how they're doing. If they're not doing well and they stop making their payments, that can present problems too. So I wanted to bring your attention to an article from the Washington Post. The headline is "Condominiums in Crisis: Financial Troubles Put Many Communities at Risk." And there are a few things in here that I think are key to keeping in mind, and also things that should guide you if you're going to be buying a condominium. Things you should be thinking in the back of your head, things you should absolutely check. And there's also an interesting element to this that kind of blows me away, because in my view, it probably shouldn't have been able to happen, but we can talk about that more if anyone's interested. There is a development called Grand Bell 2 that's a condominium community in Silver Spring that's right around the D.C. area. This is Maryland politics is the subject of this, so I'm guessing that's where it's located. They don't have any money for lifeguards, chemicals, insurance, or any of those things. The vistas, and so their pool is tarped over and unused and fenced off. The Vistas at Washingtonian Woods in Gaithersburg faces a $600,000 bill in repairs, but has just $400,000 in cash reserves. Personal ground truth for me, where my condo is located in Hawaii, there is a building directly next door to it that is not associated with us, where they've just discovered that they have to come up with $1.2 million to deal with a sewage issue for them. That's a huge deal, right? So it's a question of scale, and it's a question of what can happen with these things. And if you get yourself hooked up with a HOA that has these kinds of problems, you're entering into a situation where the problems you might be saddled with could be gigantic. Another example is Saxony Square in Alexandria. There's a gentleman who's unemployed, 9 months behind on his mortgage payments, negotiates with lenders to keep his 2-bedroom condo. His neighbors struggle to pay their monthly fees. Since 2010, The board of directors has filed more than 80 court actions to try to collect such assessments. Let's see. As posh condos, quoting now, as posh condos rise in trendy neighborhoods around the nation's capital, many older complexes are mired in a recession that never ended. A cycle of aging infrastructure, limited resources, and foreclosure is putting these communities in a deep financial hole, threatening what traditionally has been an affordable path to home ownership for the working class. Now, what's interesting is I sort of skipping down a bit. They're talking about suffering communities, and that's all absolutely valid. But I jumped down and discovered that one of these folks actually got an FHA loan on their property. And they got it in 2010, got a great price. How did that, the FHA has some rules relating to what they will finance, particularly in a condominium. But she made a low down payment, was able to stretch her salary as a workforce consultant for the state of Maryland to cover her mortgage payment and the $490 fee. So, and I get that. But how did this qualify for FHA? If you don't have the right number of owners in the unit, and I would guess something like this probably is mostly owner occupied, but if you don't have a certain amount of reserve, if you don't have an HOA that is seeing the right amount of money coming in terms of HOA dues and all those kinds of things, FHA won't lend on that stuff. So I don't know how much has changed in the last 6 years from when she purchased this place, but I'm stunned that now the FHA program is seen as something that has provided funds for this kind of thing. It would seem like this is a high-risk type of move. And that's one reason why my attention is drawn to this. We could have two discussions. We could have a discussion about whether or not FHA should be doing these loans. But I think what's even more important is that we should have the discussion about how do you enter into these smartly. I have a very hard time believing that if someone was helping this person work through this purchase process, they wouldn't have looked at it and said, I've got some words of warning for you. I have a hard time believing that in 2010, you couldn't see the seeds that existed that pointed out a problem. Now, of course, I live in an area that is very different. This kind of stuff doesn't tend to happen simply because the demand is so high from folks that are looking to get into places that the money flows, right? And while there are areas, and there were some back in the downturn that were riskier, that were a little bit more challenged, maybe didn't have as much reserve as they should, those all ended up benefiting from the upturn in the market. Clearly, these are places that haven't. But what's the key I'm trying to point out here is you need to really try to look into the crystal ball of any condo. If you have any question in your mind at all, if you see deferred maintenance, if you see a very low reserve in terms of, and there is no magic number for reserve. I understand that there's several different formulas that are used by different places to figure out how much reserve there should be. But you're basically trying to figure out, given the number of units involved, and given the expenses incurred on a yearly basis in terms of upkeep, water, electricity for all the common areas, does that balance out? And other things you're going to want to calculate into that don't often get calculated in is how old is the roof? When was the last time the roofs were all repaired? And get an understanding of what the condominium association is responsible for, and then get a feeling for how at risk are these various components that they're required to pay for. If you go into a place like this and the roofs are in horrible shape, and you can ballpark what it would cost to get the roofs done, right? If you take, and you can do this on Google, you can figure out what would be the average cost for a roof of X amount of square footage. And normally with a condo, that's easy. There's probably either one single condo set up like a townhouse that has stairs. Here in California, we still call those condos. I know in a lot of parts of the country, a condo is a single story thing. But in any event, you can calculate the per unit square footage of roof space. If you've got 2 units and each unit is 600 square feet, one above the other, take that 600 square feet and estimate that's probably about the roof square footage, maybe a little bit more because of the angles that are going on. But you can multiply that out and figure out the square footage and get an idea of how much it would cost to replace the roofs on these types of places and see if there's enough reserves in there to do it. What about emergency things? Is there a lot of deferred maintenance? Does it look like the drainage is right? If the drainage isn't right, that can be a huge deal. So just as a warning to you, I'm going to go ahead and post a link to this story. It goes on and on. There's all kinds of stuff. 2012 engineering study estimated a $600,000 work was needed to repair poor grading, tripping hazards, retaining walls, crumbling parking lots. The current board has hiked fees 33% on average to between $325 and $600 a month. Hermitage Woods in Silver Springs, previous boards raised fees but failed to set aside money for repairs. 43-year-old building has been without a working elevator for at least 8 months. The list goes on, and it is shocking. And you need to be in a position where you need to assess the health of a community now, but also its ability to tackle tough stuff down the road. So I'm going to go ahead and post this. I'd suggest you read it. It's a creepy read in terms of just the amount of screwed up stuff that's going on. And I get that some of these are in much more challenged areas. But in looking at some of these, I don't think all of these are necessarily, at the extreme low end. But you let the story speak for itself for you, and serve as absolutely a warning post for you in terms of what not to get yourself into. And I'll tell you, you might say to yourself, well, you know what? Even I'll just rent this. Right? At a price like this lady talked about paying $100,000 in 2010. You say, you know what? I'll jump on board when things are tough, right? Because in adversity, there are opportunities. And that's also true. But if you don't assess the risk side, you may find yourself being an owner in one of these places with an assessment for a huge amount of money, or you might find yourself living in a condemned building. That would be bad. So you need to be, if you're going to jump in on something really challenging like this, you need to be ridiculously savvy and have a lot of confidence in your ability to project what's going to happen. And for me, this would simply be a no-go. I would not, and I consider myself a guy fairly willing to take a risk. But I would, even if I had numbers that indicated some margin of confidence, I'd have to have a ridiculously large margin of confidence in this. Because remember, you're deferring a lot of what's going to happen here to other people. You're not in charge of this. You don't get to say, I'm going to bring up the resources to fix my roof and do these things and make it all work. That's not going to help, because you have to buy into the community of people fixing the problem. And that's really where the biggest problem is. So you always want to make sure you're getting into these situations where you've got a robust community of people who are saving money for those tough times or saving money for those repairs, planning ahead. And if you can put some and you want to try to invest in some of these things, sit down and talk with folks that are on the board. You're going to get a lot of insights into what's going on with the community. And having done this before, once you've sat down and talked to or sit down for a board meeting, they usually have them in Hawaii, for instance, they have them every month. Try to sit in on one and see what happens. You're going to get an awful lot of insights into sitting down at one association meeting in terms of getting a grip on what the problem is. And you may even be able to ascertain that it's the incompetence of the folks running the place. All right. I hope that's been some useful information, give you at least a couple of tools that you can use to better evaluate condos. And, I would even jump through those hoops on any condo. Have I done it every single time? No, I haven't, just because sometimes it was so obvious that a condo, just from looking at the numbers, was fine. It was, in terms of upkeep, everything looked very well maintained, and the numbers looked really good, and the reserve was there. Clearly, there's that. But if you want to get a feeling on a more personal level of what it's going to be like living with an HOA, going to an HOA meeting, I think, is a really good move, because you're going to get a sense for the attitude of the folks in charge, of whether or not they're these folks that are going to be pestered because you put a flag up in your window or you put a plant up by your front door. And if those are things that bother you, those are definitely good things to know about. So, all right, folks. As always, I truly appreciate you spending your valuable time with me for at least a small part of your day. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to y'all next time.